I'm here with Amir Rao, Gavin Simon, co-founders, and Greg Kasavin, creative director of Supergiant Games, the exceptionally talented, creative and business-savvy indie behind Bastion, Transistor and Pyre. Greg joined the founders, Amir and Gavin, at Supergiant Games just after 2009. They've released 3 RPG games based around very different themes that we're going to dig into. Supergiant has sold over 6 million units since its first game was launched in 2011. Amir, Greg and Gavin, I'm so pleased to have you here at the Business of Indie Games 2010. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll drive straight in. So it was a big move to leave your corporate studio jobs at EA and build a studio from your living room. And the question says here that how did you know it was the right thing to do? But setting up as an indie developer is always the right thing to do if it's in your heart. But what was it like? How did you make the leap, and what learnings did you take from there?
Yeah, I mean, so we were inspired by a lot of the games that we were playing at the time that were being made by small teams like Plants vs. Zombies and Braid and Castle Crashers. Smaller teams making more kind of personal experiences that felt like people made them. So we wanted to do the same thing. So Gavin and I packed up all our stuff and we moved up to San Jose into the living room of my dad's house, where we started work on our first game. And a lot of the conversations about what that first game would be like happened in that U-Haul truck.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I'm not sure. I don't know how you would answer it. How did we know it was right?
I think it was stated in the question. Some of it was just in our hearts, and it was just something that we were going to do, and we thought we had the resources and ability to do it.
There was a now or never type of feeling to it at the time for you guys, I think, right? Is just kind of circumstantially and
I think we felt like we were in a position to take a risk also. We were both just people trying to make something. We had worked professionally for Gavin for much longer than I had. But we had been working on games for several years and trying to figure out what would be next for us.
Yeah. But as for the learning part of it, I definitely think we did learn a lot about actually developing a game and the production discipline at EA. And so having the years we spent there was definitely we took that with us, the discipline to make our games.
Yeah, and I did some work for EAD, and they would bring 17 people to a localization meeting. And certainly they whipped me into shape and taught me how to run a project and let you do the project unless you run it right.
Mm-hmm.
So, you must have taken some really valuable experience into your projects. Did you also take creative ideas, not from Electronic Arts, but did you take anything from the creative process that they have?
Well, I think we reference our experience at EA a lot here. So Greg worked with Gavin and I at Electronic Arts too, doing production and design and some writing there as well. And I think for us, both the things that they were good at and the things that they weren't good at were really useful sort of talking points for us even today when we think about how we could be doing things efficiently or where we might get bogged down with stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it for us, you kind of alluded to it in your own way with a big localization meeting. It's just part of the appeal of working in a smaller group of people is that each individual has a by percentage a bigger impact on the end result, and the buck can stop with each individual person. The person implementing a feature doesn't necessarily have to answer to anybody but themselves, and there's a certain appeal in that for sure, and it brings with it a greater speed of iteration in a lot of cases. Fewer people. We would talk about how there are fewer people to say no to different ideas, for better or for worse.
Were you there a long time?
I actually started as a QA tester for Westwood Studios.
Oh wow, back in the day.
Yeah, in 2001 or 2002. So I was there for a long time while I was going to school and getting my degree in computer science.
And Greg and I were there for about the same amount of time, I think, about 3 years. Yeah.
That's a great background. And really gives you a good foundation to start up as an indie. So let's talk a little bit about Bastion, if we can. You obviously trusted that Bastion would succeed as an independent video game. Did you know you were onto a winner? Did you know you were onto a winner?
Of course.
Yeah,
we couldn't have possibly, right?
Yeah, I don't think we knew that. So we had no way of predicting Bastion's success. Even our idea of how successful it could be was totally dwarfed by what it became over time. So for us, there was I think we thought we were chasing a game that we were really interested in making, that we were really excited for the specific ideas, and that we didn't see a lot of things like it out at the moment that we thought it would come out. And so for us, that was the combination of kind of like creative excitement and opportunity. But I don't think we've ever worked on a game where like we all looked at each other and said, this is a winner. This is guaranteed to be the thing that everybody wants to see. We get just as anxious as we were when we revealed Bastion for the first time every time it comes time for us to think about what we're going to do next and how we might show it to the world and how will they react. So some things have been a constant for us, working together for many years now.
Yeah, I mean, there are no guarantees at all. Did you have some insight? What was your test community like?
Yeah, it was friends. Yeah, it was like a lot of friends. It's sort of a special kind of talent to be able to play an unfinished game, because games are really bad through like a large portion of their life. So we had like a trusted community of people who we either worked with or were our close friends who we would run through the game, and we got as much from observing them as we did from their comments on the game that helped kind of drive it somewhere. And so for us, it was just it was then and continues to be a really important process for us to get our games in front of kind of like a smaller group of trusted people.
We also did enter the game into competitions, which was, particularly the PAX 10 was really key. Getting the game to be judged kind of more formally was, it forces you to look at it through kind of a different sort of lens when you realize that people you're not friends with are going to play it, and suddenly you can't, caveat anything. And then, we also made sure that as soon as we announced the game, we wanted to make sure that it was in a state that anybody could play it. So when we first debuted it, it was at like a public gaming event, PAX, and that's when anybody could walk up and play it. And that was, in addition to hopefully showing well in an environment like that, it was certainly useful for us as a development team with most of the production still ahead of us to be able to see how people interacted with it, what was working, what wasn't, and so on. And that ended up being a very encouraging experience for us.
Did you polish up one piece like to a vertical slice?
Yeah, for us, we'd been through kind of like a vertical slice style process at EA, but for them, they would often pick like a piece of content at some random point in the game and try to bring it all the way up. For us, partially due to the narrative components of our game and partially due to like our emphasis and focus on teaching and making a strong first impression, we've always kind of built our games sequentially from the start to the end. Whenever we've shown our games or announced them with playable, we've always started at the beginning. And so for us, it's been really, really important to get the openings of our game right on every level, from the design, the art, the gameplay, the tutorial, the narrative. All of these different components have to work together and make a strong impression from the start to help you understand and feel that it's like a Supergiant game It's worthy of your time. So for us, the thing we polished was just the very beginning of the game. And then when we got back from PAX, we had to make the rest of it. It was what we had, and you know, it was exciting to see the response to what was essentially just the beginning of the game. It wasn't some fake demo that we had made just for that occasion.
Yeah, yeah, and also it makes a lot of sense starting from the beginning. I mean, sometimes, you know, when I ask to make a vertical slice and they want to show off the best bits, it means that you need to write most of the game systems anyway to get to that point. Yeah. So also I think like starting at the beginning like that, it gives your community a sense of something to look forward to. You can almost go with them with the narrative, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's less context you have to provide that the game isn't providing itself, right? Because
yeah, of course,
the game should reveal itself to you, what it's about, you know, early on if it can.
I was watching some of it today on YouTube, you know, some of the people playing it, and it certainly looks like a lot of fun. So marketing theory will tell 100 things that you need to do to test a new concept. Was your desire to build Bastion based on intuition, or did you take a methodical approach to working out the market, the needs, the players, the strategy?
There was maybe some mix. I mean, intuition was certainly a significant portion of that percentage. But as a group of people who kind of was very actively involved in playing games regularly and just kind of paying attention to what was out there, we sort of recognized a couple of things, and one was that we really love this style of like what we call the action role playing game, action RPG. It's, you know, dungeon crawler. It comes in different forms. We didn't see a lot of games like that on console, and we didn't see a lot of games like that with a narrative component. So it just felt like a good choice of a format. It was something that we were excited to work on, and something that we didn't feel was like oversaturated, and something that we felt we could execute on, as opposed to like, you know, a multiplayer first-person shooter or something like that. We weren't, you know, that might have been a popular style of game, but not one that we felt we could make, or that we were, you know, felt as excited to make. But as far as like really formal market testing, you know, we didn't really delve into anything like that.
Personally, it reminded me a little bit of Final Fantasy. And I could see that it's a sort of underserved genre that you've chosen there. Was that any influence on you?
Final Fantasy is while not an overt influence on Bastion, is definitely one of those like big spiritual influences, definitely on myself, and I think on a bunch of us who work here. We said, you know, when it came time again to sort of like reveal the game and start talking about what our studio was even trying to achieve, we landed on this idea that we want to make games that spark your imagination like the games you played as a kid. And that means, of course, something different to everybody. It means something different depending on how old the person is. But for the group of us, and we have a variety of ages here and everything, but we still kind of roughly grew up playing games like in the kind of what we all consider the golden age of games to be, is like that kind of like 90s era, you know, 16-bit Super Nintendo, whatever, maybe on into the Nintendo 64 era. So these games that were both nostalgic for, and also we think like created, like formed almost like this sort of stable of classics upon which modern games are still being built. So we like to
Resident Evil 2, anyone?
Yeah, you know, we're talking even older stuff than, like, we were particularly thinking about like 2D, you know, like back before stuff was 3D polygonal and so on, because our games have all been 2D games, kind of more in the, you know, classic Zelda format or something like that. So we wanted to make games that could make other people feel the way those classic games made us feel when we were growing up.
Yeah, thank you.
Described our games as interesting mixes. We'll often hear like, you know, each one of our games is a cross between this game and this game, and you know, usually there's, you know, one person on this team has one of those games as something they love, or you can see bits and pieces, but you know, never quite dead on for one of them.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can really get that you have a really nice vibe in your studio. The game has a particularly long tail, like another great indie game from my friend Mark Morris, who made Prison Architect. Now that lends itself very well to DLC, you know, games as a service, where Bastion has a very defined ending and a defined narrative. So it seems as though that's not the right, you know, games as a service or live ops is not the right model for Bastion. But what have you done to support the long tail, because it continues to sell, right?
Yeah, and every year we're always surprised to see how many new players basically come into playing Bastion, and it's really amazing to see that. For us, we know there's at least a handful of things that we did to help support that, which is, you know, when we make our games, we support them for the lifetime on the platforms they're on. So if for any reason they need an update or there's some new platform feature, you know, on iPhone and iPad, especially, that's the kind of thing, because there's always new devices being released, that we try to support them there. The other thing we did, which is implied in the first answer, is we put the game on a lot of different platforms after it came out. And we were really, really excited to see the game have an audience on so many different things. Whether it, you know, it started on console, but on PC shortly after, on iPhone and iPad. We had the game on Mac and Linux. There were a bunch of other places. I'm probably forgetting some. But that support over time was really, really valuable, because it meant that we were getting fans and audiences in all sorts of different places, and you know, all the way to the PlayStation 4. You know, we didn't know that we would bring Bastion to the PlayStation 4. You know, it came out after our second game, Transistor, on PlayStation 4, and still had a big audience there. So for us, we've been really, really happy to see that, and it also means that, you know, Bastion is a game that ends, but for us, it's always been a part of our life. Like every couple months or couple weeks, you know, there's always something going on. We're shipping merchandise that's Bastion related. We're talking to fans online about Bastion. So even if we wanted to escape it, which we don't, we couldn't, because it's been such an enormous part of our history and our heritage as a studio. And so you know, that part you can hope for that, but you can't necessarily just architect that. The few choices we were able to make around that for a game that does end was updating it where we could, and supporting it on all those different platforms.
Yeah, great. And then with each platform iteration, you're finding a new market there.
Yeah, and also new design sort of chops for us. You know, we had never made a game that used a touch interface until we released on iPhone and iPad. So
yeah, of course.
And so there's something really valuable to us. You know, at the time when we did that, it's because we were playing a lot of games on our iPads and phones as well. And it's one of those things where a big part of the joy of a small studio is the possibility of like learning and learning new things every year and learning as the game industry grows. So that part of Bastion's process was enormously valuable to us as a studio.
I'm sure our audience are finding this very insightful, actually. So as well as you know, developing updates for other platforms and interfaces, are you also putting anything into marketing for Bastion still?
So I think we can say safely that there are things we do that help raise awareness of the game, but it's stuff that we like just want to do anyway. So things like the Bastion vinyl release, which came out many years after you know, I didn't know that we would be like a prolific record distributor, but that's turned out to be the case for us because our soundtracks are such an important part of our game. So that's an example of something that happened many years after Bastion came out, and that, you know, was a component. All that creative work was done here, and figuring out, you know, what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, and how we're going to put it out into the world, what artists we want to work with to make it, to make all the packaging and all that kind of stuff. That's all stuff that we were still working on many years after the launch.
We also find that since our games are still available, they don't, being digital games, they don't go out of print quite the same way as like physical products might. As we release more, as we've released more games, it's been really great to see our players and customers kind of approach them in different sequences. You know, for our second game, Transistor, many of the players who jumped into it, you know, on the first day, of course, came from having been fans of Bastion. But these days we hear about players who, you know, play the games in reverse order or any different, you know, hopefully they enjoy each game in its own right. And they in many cases, they seek out the other games we've made, which we feel really good about. And that, you know, again, reinforces why it's so important to us to maintain them over time.
Are there particular channels where you find the people? What channels have been most effective for you?
I mean, we use you know, direct marketing and social media. You know, we come from the bygone age of 2009 when, you know, social media was young and innocent, had a bright outlook on life, and it's always been effective for us as just a way of, you know, we both email marketing and just direct kind of social media interaction with our fans. We love being able to bring news about our games just kind of directly to our fans that way. I'm sure, you know, we started before things like Twitch TV even existed and so on. So it's funny to think that, but our ability to reach players just through social media channels has been pretty effective for us in the past. Yeah, wow.
And was Bastion self-published? Did you have a publisher for that or a distributor?
Yeah, so Bastion came out in an era on Xbox Live Arcade where you needed a publisher in order to release your game of some sort. So you had the opportunity to work with Microsoft or a variety of third-party publishers. And we had a really, really great partner, and continue to, in Warner Brothers, who was our partner on that game. You know, we self-funded Bastion. We developed all of it, and Warner helped us distribute it on Xbox Live Arcade and some of the other places that came out later. They were really, really instrumental in a bunch of aspects of supporting us, helping us go to PAX. We could never have gone to a show like E3 and shown Bastion there without their support. Help us through, you know, our first submission as an independent and all that kind of stuff. So we learned a lot working with them, and it's awesome to maintain a great relationship with them all through Bastion's life. I
worked with Scott Walker over there. Do you know
Scott Walker? The name is not familiar to me. I mean, our key person over there was a guy named Mike Leon, and then there was remembering like dozens of names and people we still work with today. But yeah, there's a lot of people over there who you can see their names in the credits actually at Bastion who helped.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I did Scooby-Doo for them.
Oh, cool.
2D, you know, back in the day, and they gave me some animations to use in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I submitted the game. They unsigned them off. We had to do them all again.
Oh, no.
You talked a little bit about building the community. That doesn't sound like it's always plain sailing. It's difficult to manage a large amount of people and keep them all happy. What pitfalls have you come along? Have you found, and what's worked for you as well?
At the heart of it is just, I think we so value our player base, like responsiveness toward our player base has just driven a lot of our decisions and I think instincts when it comes to that aspect of our business. So we've always, you know, we get emails from a lot of players, whether it's like a random technical support issue or it's, you know, a very kindly worded thank you for the game, and we've always just tried to reply to everything as promptly as possible and have the same type of interaction that, you know, in the more public forum of social media. So I think
there's that and PAX, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. There's
Yeah.
also like our in-person, you know, at least twice a year, we go to these public events. Typically, it's been PAX Prime and PAX East, these big conventions with about 70, 80,000 people who, you know, pay to go play video games for 3 to 4 days. And among their choices are games from our little studio. And for us, it's a really wonderful opportunity to meet people face to face, watch how they actually interact with our games, like for real, see their faces light up if they're really enjoying it. So for us, it's always been like an incredibly inspiring and kind of invigorating experience. So we're also just really fortunate to have made games that that have just connected with our audience. So we've all worked on games that weren't as well liked in the past, and so we feel really lucky that our last 3 games, you know, our 3 games at Supergiant have all found kind of a loving audience, and their kind words really keep us going. You know, we love seeing their own kind of creative works inspired by those games, and we just naturally want to engage with players around our games, and you know, if they're having trouble playing them for some odd reason, help solve their problems and so on. So because that's the bottom line for us, is we're not making these things for ourselves, we're making them for our audience. So having that direct relationship with our audience is actually, I think also part of the appeal of having the smaller studio to begin with, because it's so less filtered than if you're working at a much bigger studio. You may not have the opportunity to interact directly with one of your players that way, because it's not your job. You have a whole other department, you know, that's responsible for that.
Sure. Do you have any? Do you have like a community manager now?
We've never had a dedicated, you know, since we were 7 people on Bastion, and then 12 through most of the rest of our life, and we're a little bit bigger now at about 15 just as of this year. We've never had a dedicated community manager, though part of that is the nature of the games that we make. As you said, you know, they're these kind of narrative driven games. They're not like live service games with like if we were making like online multiplayer competitive games, I think the need for something like that would be much greater. But given the nature of our games, the kind of fan interactions we get are less challenging to manage than you know, maintaining like an esports league or something like that as a point of comparison.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. We touched a little bit on you know, your reputation for building games, you know, on time and on budget. You know, in an industry that's notorious for, you know, late release and slippage. You know, I've got to be honest, I've slipped a few myself, so I'm very impressed with your reputation. Is this born out of the training you had at EA alone, or do you have other secret sauce to add?
Well, yeah, I think for sure a big part of it is EA watching how their games were scoped and managed to launch was you know, was pretty amazing, especially on our team, where we shipped like 4 RTS titles in a very short amount of time in our several years that we were there, with expansion packs and whatever else. For us, I think a lot of it also comes out, and this is probably maybe more relatable for all the people who didn't work at EA, is just out of the necessity of constraints. Like anything you do is going to be constrained, even on a 120-person team or a 5-person team or a 2-person team. And so it's always been really important for us from the beginning to like embrace those constraints and look at them as like useful ways to drive smart design, art, audio, narrative decisions about what you're going to do. So that was something that kind of formed over time, just from the first couple months of working on Bastion, and it's stuck, I think, with the studio all the way to today. We view constraints as very useful. You brought up deadlines. We set our own internal deadlines, and we try to stick to them because they help us come to like better, clearer vision on what the game could be and should be based on what we have. And so that's an important part of our process. It's always evolving. So I couldn't probably easily sit down and say, these are the 5 ways in which we make that process work. It just comes out of a general sense that the constraints are like positive things. They're not these like oppressive, quality destroying, nightmarish things that they can sometimes feel like to others. And for us, it's really actually almost like a relief when we know what the constraints around a problem are, or how much time we might give ourselves to solve it, so we can move on to the next set of things, because it drives the kinds of decisions that we can all get behind.
You did mention earlier about how whenever we announce a game, we always make sure that it stands alone and is playable and it's ready to be shown. So having at least a section of the game in that state really helps a long way, because then we know we're never too far off from the end point, as opposed to it's real easy to not have a game fully at that state and then assume that it's going to be able to get there much faster than it really does. So we try to like never be too far away from the level of polish that we want at any given time.
Yeah, it's really tempting to polish everything later, but for us, a polish is actually just a part of the process. So it means that the game is constantly approaching the feel we want and approaching the vibe we want, and so that part of it helps reinforce all that.
Oh, I'm with you there. I'd much rather get the polish and the problems out of the way now, rather than try and do it between sort of beta and gold. So, I mean, smart decisions in development, but you've also made smart decisions strategically. From the beginning, with the publishing deal with Warner Brothers, you've also held on to your own IP. You didn't take any development money from your publishers. What guided you with that strategy?
Yeah, I think independence has always been really important to us. We really value retaining our own independence, and we want to basically support our own ideas and invest in ourselves as much as possible. So whenever we are thinking about where we want to put our resources and how we want to deploy them, we're always thinking about is this an idea that we're really excited about, that we want to make and support and push forward. So we've also been really lucky. I want to be clear that Bastion was successful enough to help us fund the next games and create a whole studio and those kinds of things. There are certainly games that would not be made without publishers funding them, and certain ideas that might never see the market without the support of those kinds of things. For us, though, we've been really, really lucky that we've been able to creatively control and drive every aspect of the game, its development, its exposure, and all those kinds of things here at the studio. Part of the reason it's so good to be able to do that, aside from having the control and influence over it, is we get to learn all that also. A lot of the things that a funder or someone who helps you publish a game might give you are really, really useful for you to know also. And it's I think helped strengthen our studio, that both working with Warner Brothers on Bastion and then self-publishing the next two games and having to sort of build a small publishing organization around our games. Those kinds of things have been really, really valuable to us, to have that knowledge and information internally.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think if I had my time again, I would have loved to have learned the publishing and marketing side of the business as well as the development. So do you handle that side of the business amongst yourselves, amongst the 12? So you have development and publishing knowledge, and the roles aren't split up?
Yeah, and I think part of the small team thing is a lot of us have a role in the publishing organization in addition to the development organization. What's really good about that, the part where it's not actually two totally separate groups of people, is that the decisions can be made much more holistically. The decisions that you make around how you're going to talk about the game with other people, because eventually you're going to have to do that as part of marketing it, are made alongside the development decisions and all those things. So it's not this pitch it over the fence to a bunch of people who now have to figure out how to talk about your game and how to expose it to more people. It's the very same people working on it and making it are doing that. That's not to say we don't have other help. We have numerous individuals here who help produce and do our localization and help manage any aspects of external development if we do that, or QA and partnerships with QA teams and localization and these kinds of things. But that's all stuff we built and figured out here with the people who are here.
Well, thank you. What are the best bits that you've learned from publishers and from the distribution stuff with Warner Bros?
I mean, I think at a fundamental level, when you're thinking about your video game, I think I read this in a Gama Sutra article, and I'm going to associate it with Ron Carmel, but I'm not 100% sure that he's the one that I'm thinking of here, which is like the success of your game is the like quality of it multiplied by the exposure, which basically means you cannot, in most scenarios, you need both. So you need to be thinking about both, and you need to have a plan for both. And even if you work with a publisher or someone who's going to help you do that, ultimately, probably you as a developer will have to produce those assets and have to think about how your game will be talked about and looked at. So I think the most important learning for us early on was that work is often as important as the development work, and often needs to be considered alongside all the other development decisions you're making. I don't know if you'd add anything to that. Yeah.
No, that's pretty good. I was like, is that Chris Hecker?
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah,
yeah,
really old guard.
Yeah. It's no, I think that's, you know, the other thing we learned from having worked with a publisher is just that those are, you know, publishing games on console, and they've changed the console, like the big console platforms have changed a lot and evolved a lot to make publishing for independent developers much more streamlined than at the time when we started, when already they had made numerous improvements compared with years past. Or you must have experienced this yourself, shipping PS2 games. It's a very different era now as far as like the certification process, but it remains in some ways like a labyrinthine process that you can't really fully understand or appreciate until you've sort of gone through it at least the one time. And it requires time and it requires patience, almost like kind of learning a tough new video game for the first time, I might say. So it's kind of we learned to really respect that process and give it its due amount of time and to sort of prepare for that toward the end of development. But you know, we all play games on console as well as PC, so we understand like what the end result experience really ought to be like. Though it's definitely interesting to get a peek behind the curtain and understand how, like, what it takes to actually put a game through that pipeline and see it appear, you know, on a digital storefront on the other side.
So when you're thinking about going through all of those processes, what would you say was the hardest part of developing Bastion?
I mean, making a game that, you know, is high quality while also, you know, making sure it'll have an audience, you know, getting both those things, and
building the team at the same time as well.
Yeah,
right?
having to be done on time and to that bar. So that just means everything, or if that, you know, tells you that it is that holistic, you know, not ignoring any one aspect of the process and letting something fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
With regard to not talking about specific numbers, but you funded the game yourself.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, part of the reason it's like hard for us to talk about specific numbers is like what is the budget of me and Gavin living in the living room of a home? You know, we were very lucky that my dad let us use that space. But so much of that work was done kind of in that way, with you know, I think a lot of people in the independent game space work this way, where they try and figure out, well, what can I withstand? And then is that enough time for me to make my game, and what kind of support you have? And so I think, you know, the thing we always think about sometimes, again, this comes from someone we work with at EA, our executive producer there and GM, Mike Perdue. He often talks about like, what are your advantages in a scenario? And so, you know, we did have the support of our parents, and we did have the support of like our loved ones and stuff like that. And that can be an enormous source of support, but it's hard to make that, you know, how does that fit into the budget? I don't know. But it would have been impossible
but if you
without
Yeah, we often think of budgets as much in terms of time as money, obviously interchangeable in many parts, but it's easier to talk about the budget of Bastion in terms of time, how much, how long do we have to do this. And
But that's the the short-term pain, and if you do have that support, then you do keep creative control.
Right.
You've got something that you want to play, and you've made sure the fun has got in the game, and just producing another 3D walkthrough that you've actually got something that people are really interested in, and I think that really paid off for you. So and before we move on to Transistor, what's been the most incredible thing about Bastion's success?
The longevity of it,
the
right?
longevity.
The fact that we're talking about it in 2018. It's like we never, like we were saying before, it's not a game that there are many games that are architected to have the long tail, right? Games like it's the premise of the games as a service type model. You make your multiplayer game, your goal is for that game to be played, hopefully for all eternity. It has a vibrant, community and so on. But with a game like Bastion, you play it for, on average, a player might play it for like over the course of a weekend or something like that. It's not a hugely long game. And then it doesn't have like replay value in the traditional sense. So the part where it really stuck with people, it far exceeded our most kind of optimistic expectations. So we're very that's very humbling and very gratifying. We certainly, we were super fired up working on that game. That was our shot, had all of our ideas about what we value and other video games that we enjoy. We kind of crammed all of our best ideas into that game, though that is by no means any guarantee of anything. So the part where it resonated with players around the world is something that it actually took us a long time even to understand what was going on, in part because the success, it wasn't like an overnight success. It was this gradual success where it just wasn't going away for some reason. So we were kind of taken aback by that. And I think it took us many months to really realize that it was going to stick around that way.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like a really wonderful experience. So Transistor's quite different to Bastion. An RPG, but with very different themes. Why did you decide to change themes from fantasy to sci-fi, as opposed to just developing a sequel or a spin-off?
Yeah, it's a key moment, right? We could have maybe the conventional wisdom would have been to just go on and make another Bastion game, I'm sure, because it had been so successful, and we purposely built a world that could support any, we sweated the details and made a world that could support any number of stories, even though we approached Bastion as assuming, it quite possibly would be the last game we ever made as a small independent studio. But I think for Transistor is like, we were really curious to see if we could kind of do it again, if we could make something new from scratch again, because we enjoyed that process of making something kind of out of the ether. And before getting sort of locked into our success, which can sometimes, it's so rare for studios to experience success with one of their games, but when they are successful, sometimes they get bound by that success and they become committed to just kind of making new installments of their successful franchise. So, we're like, hey, we never imagined ourselves as like just the Bastion studio, and we're here because of like more of a mindset than like a specific game that we want to make. So we wanted to see if we could make something different. It was kind of as simple as that, and something that could assert itself as strongly as Bastion did, and kind of live up to Bastion but have its own identity.
Was it a big jump in your skill set as well?
Yeah, in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I don't know if, a big jump is necessarily the right word. It's just supposed to, we do learn and get better every year, from EA to through Bastion and onto this day. We definitely strive to improve and grow.
Yeah, so some of the challenges of it were that it's a game, we consider it a game in the same genre, though it has a very different kind of gameplay focus with this sort of almost like a strategic component, whereas Bastion is more of like a fast-paced hack and slash game. And by virtue of wanting to make a game with its own distinct identity, it meant that all those great ideas that we came up with for Bastion were ideas that we were reluctant to employ again for a new game, because if we just used all those ideas again, we'd be making a Bastion game, not Transistor. So even when it came to decisions like the camera perspective, which is essentially identical between Transistor and Bastion, we still, none of those decisions were made sight unseen. We still like really carefully evaluated those things before sometimes coming back to a decision that was the same as one we made in the past. But it was all with an eye toward trying to make a game that had its own distinct feel and Transistor.
Yeah, thank you. And it does have just that. You decided to self-publish this time.
Yeah.
Was it a brainer, or did you have to really strategically consider the pros and cons between working with Warner Brothers again or doing it yourself?
Yeah. I mean, we considered all our options for sure. And so for us, we were just really interested in trying it ourselves. It's similar to what Greg was saying on the development side, and this is part of the advantage of the same people making decisions on both sides, is not only do we want to try something with a new original game with the whole team there from the start doing something different, we also wanted to see if we could do it ourselves on the publishing side. And that meant learning a lot of the things ourselves, and that started almost right away, where we were learning to set up our own events, go to PAX ourselves, what these different components of managing your marketing and these different components of getting out to shows and doing the meetings yourself and doing the conversations yourself. So a lot of that stuff was I think we got better at over the course of Transistor, because we had to do more of it ourselves and learn more of it ourselves. It was awesome, and it wasn't like we did it all ourselves. I want to be clear. We enjoyed a really great partnership with Sony on Transistor. It was awesome to see Transistor kind of the console debut revealed on stage at E3, and things like that really amplified and magnified the presence of the game and the awareness of the game. So part of that publishing, part of the big takeaway is that a small team like us can really benefit from certain big partnerships, and so we strive to find those where we can, where it makes sense for the game, and if it makes sense for the game.
Yeah, I mean, did you find like a big increase in workload? Were you like having to sort of upload links online?
Yeah, so we did some hiring as well to help us with the publishing work, right? So we have Michael here and Morgan here, who are two people, you can read about them on our website, but they help handle a lot of that publishing kind of work, and we do a lot of it ourselves, of course. On top of that, there's just like the increase in work was, I think, across the board, because we also had Bastion. So we were also maintaining Bastion the whole time that we were working on Transistor. So suddenly we were accompanied with a catalog. It's a catalog of one game, but it was one game that was on 6 or 7 platforms. So that's another aspect of becoming a publisher, right? Is managing your catalog and working with it across multiple platforms and supporting it and all that kind of stuff. And now we're a publisher with a catalog of 3 games, and that has its own complexities and things. So yeah, that's an example of the way the work increases.
Yeah, I see. Also the leverage to reach more people, I suppose, too.
Yeah, it can be, of course, in our case, it's meant a bigger audience, which is great. And they may have come to us for Pyre, they may have come to us for Transistor or Bastion or whichever. And certainly, when you have that many more players, it's just more interactions to have all the way across the board.
I was doing my homework. I could see there was loads of stuff online, loads on YouTube, game footage, reviews, etc. What's your experience of working with the influencers, and do you build special relationships with them, or did they just virally pick up your stuff?
It's closer to the latter for us traditionally. We've always, so I have a background in the gaming press, which I think above all just kind of gives me an empathy for that trade. So we've just always been very like, I guess I hope it's correct to say we've been proactive in our kind of media outreach when folks approach us wanting to cover our games, whether in kind of more traditional gaming website publications or streaming or YouTube content creators. We've always been super appreciative and want to give them what they need as quickly as possible so they can do what they want to do. And from our perspective, it's like sight unseen. Say what you're going to say. It's your channel. It's your content. And we value and our stance, both when playtesting and when it comes to, critical feedback and game reviews and YouTubers, whatever else, is like, it's the player's experience is inarguable. So we just value whatever form the feedback takes, and we fundamentally appreciate that people want to play our games in this sort of capacity. So we will work with them and try to, and if that helps get our games out there, then fantastic. But it's been a relatively intuitive process for us like that traditionally. Again, it's, we have these like narrative rich games with a lot of like voiceover and so on. So if anything, we've been kind of surprised that they've done as well as they have with like streamers and YouTubers, because that's a format where the content creator often speaks during the play experience, which isn't, our games in the past haven't been like super well configured for that, but it's worked out anyway. It's something we're certainly aware of, and a bunch of us, myself included, are like, we watch this stuff day and night ourselves, so it's like something we naturally care about from like a natural place, and it's been great to have had certain content creators who've been able to like play multiple games of ours over time and start to sort of draw inferences about themes running across them and so on. So there's always, we've seen and read and listened to like really fascinating kind of analyses of our different games. So that part is great, because it's another version of like the kind of interactions we have at PAX. We just appreciate that we've made games that people care enough to want to showcase or talk about and or write about and so on.
Yeah, I can see that like the criticism is really useful, and the sort of appreciation tells you that you've got something that stands on its own 2 feet. So you can kind of release it and let them do what they want with it because of your belief in the product, right?
Yeah, that's the hope for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, as well with Transistor as well as Bastion, you've released it across a lot of devices, and tailored, touchscreen and phones. You've really worked on that, and I've done a few ports myself. Simultaneous PS4 and Xbox and GameCube. All at once, and it can be very difficult to manage those individual SKUs. Because of the specifics of each platform, as you mentioned earlier. What would our audience, could developers learn, and what can they avoid when it comes to porting?
I mean, so I think this has not always been true, but a lot of the times, although our games are on many platforms, they have not come to those platforms simultaneously, which is a great relief, because it sounds like, as you've experienced, trying to get them to come to all those platforms simultaneously is very, very difficult. So the ability to release a game on one platform and then focus on the next one and the specific problems for that is certainly very valuable, though it does come with some potential drawbacks. there.
Yeah, and I think for us too, because it's been sequential for us, it's meant that each kind of version of the game that we've released has had its own space, and so its own time to learn and its own time to figure out what the game is. I think one of the biggest takeaways in this regard to us, which actually happened on both Bastion and Transistor, is when you make a new version of your game months after release, you have such a different understanding of what the fundamental components of the game are that like matter, which is weird because it seems like you should really understand your game before it ships. But to give you a sense of what I mean, on Bastion, the like default touch controls, you know, you can play it with a virtual gamepad, but you also, you know, mostly you just sort of position the character. It's a game of positioning. The character kind of can fire on his own and that kind of stuff. And that's an example of a decision I don't think we would have made without some distance from the game to understand what is at the heart of this experience, and with this device, how would you make that work? And also, can you offer maybe the experience that people have come to expect if they're repurchasing the game? And so, you know, the same thing happened on Transistor, even with the knowledge that we had going into it about how to work with you know, touch devices and stuff. We realized there were aspects of our interface that could have been improved, and you know, I think we always stand behind the most recent version of the game in a lot of ways because it has our most it has all our most recent ideas in it about what the game should be like and what it should feel like. So it's an awesome opportunity when you work on your own versions, if you don't just sort of send it away, to kind of learn more about your game.
With Pyre, you know, you're not short of great new game ideas. That's really clear.
Yeah.
Where did the inspiration for Pyre come from?
Yeah, I think, you know, you heard how we talked about our mindset going into Transistor, and we wanted to kind of, here we were once again. Transistor was a significantly longer development than Bastion, though that's in part because we had done a lot of Bastion work. You know, we continued really actively working on Bastion for something like another year and a half or something after the game's initial debut, and while at the same time we were Transistor was in pre-production. But all told, Transistor was about 3 years in development, and we were at the end of that period, we were very eager to just knuckle down and start making something new once again. And each of our games in some respects has been done in response to the previous game. It's almost like as much as we love each of the games we've worked on, by the end of the development, we're like naturally excited about a change of pace. So that probably informed why, you know, Transistor is a kind of this almost like a cyberpunk themed science fiction game as opposed to Bastion's fantasy world. And one of the aspects of Transistor is that it's this kind of like, it's a game that takes place in this sort of like doomed and a rather isolated feeling city. And so as we sat down to think about our next game after that, we were really excited by the idea of a bigger ensemble cast and kind of a warmer feeling game where you're kind of surrounded by your friends and might go on this big kind of fantasy road trip together and solve each other's, you know, achieve some kind of collective goal while kind of solving everyone's personal problems as well. This idea of the ensemble cast was at the heart of it, I think, and this exploring kind of team dynamics in a variety of lenses. So and then, you know, our games start with ideas that are fairly broad, like what I just said, and we get down into what the specifics of that actually mean from like a gameplay prototyping standpoint, and, you know, thinking about the story. But yeah, Transistor, you know, we looking back on it, and I think even at the time, all of us, I think, feel the same way, that Transistor was really only possible as like our third game. We never would have.
Pyre.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean Pyre.
Yeah.
It was a game that we continued to push ourselves out of our creative comfort zone and see what we could do. And I think part of the attraction to the types of ideas we've pursued is that we don't know exactly what form they're going to take when we start working on them. We're just excited by the promise and are excited to see how it takes shape. So yeah, Pyre. You know, we endeavored to make kind of our biggest game, with its biggest cast of characters and most kind of expansive feeling world, but once again, create a whole new world and cast of characters from scratch just to see if we can make a game with its own distinct feel, for the third time.
Yeah, it sounds like you went into the were deeper into relationships in this game as well.
Yeah.
I'm excited to play it. Actually, I've not played it myself. You've just enrolled me into playing.
Cool. Yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
What did you learn from the previous two and do differently, from a production standpoint?
I mean, one of the things, it's funny, one of the dangers that one of the perils that I think we take upon ourselves by making like a significantly different game, like at least a relatively different game each time, is that some of the specific learnings of our previous projects don't necessarily apply. So once again, with something like Pyre, it was a whole new game for us to figure out. So I certainly experienced moments of like where we're just having to learn everything from scratch. But of course, we're building on a lot of mature tools and technology and production techniques that are helping carry us through.
It was also different, very different than Transistor, because Transistor, even though we didn't talk about it that much as a group, was built under this enormous pressure from having succeeded with Bastion. And so Pyre, I think, was just a different sort of atmosphere for us, having made a game in Transistor that people liked and that people responded really well to. There was less of a sense that we only had one thing in us. So it was brand new stuff to learn, but it was also the whole vibe of making it was different. And I think that's been true of all three of our games. We've kept the core of this team together for over 8 years now, right? And still every year of development is somehow totally different than the one that precedes it. So that's just sort of an observation on it.
You self-published again. What was your distribution strategy this time? You've got lessons learned from the two experiences now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us, it was, I think we just were, how would we describe the strategy? It was like,
it was similar to Transistor,
yeah,
honestly.
we were really, we thought, so at 12 people, we could simultaneously ship on PC and potentially one console. So that was the limits of what we could do as a small team. So if you look at those in the sort of the beauty of constraints way, that kind of constrained what our options were. We were really comfortable with the support that we got from Sony, and really happy with how our engine performs on the PlayStation 4. And so those components helped us make the decision to do something very similar, which was to simultaneously ship on PlayStation 4 and Steam and the PC platforms and stuff like that. So that was our strategy on Pyre, and it came out of our experience on Transistor.
We haven't really touched much on technology, but having that mature code base and all of your submission packages already already been through the platform processor a couple of times must really given you an advantage.
Yes. Having a game where it throws the right error message when you rip out the controller, all the way.
Yeah.
Very, very
improved.
Yeah, it's a small thing, but you accumulate enough of those things right over time. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely, and it can take months the first time round, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And even you speak to this often, Amir, but the relationships that we have with the folks that we work with on the platform side, that's really valuable as well. It's so much of the game industry is just the team dynamic and the collaboration, either internally on your team or with whoever you're working with to release a game. And just having worked with people over time, you learn each other and you learn how to collaborate better. And that applies working with external groups, whether it's a QA team or a first party group like Sony and so on. So we really, those are some of the benefits, I think the hidden benefits we reap just from having survived this long, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's, it's a tough, I think the spirit of this kind of conversation is, or the underpinnings of it, or that this has always been a tough business to navigate, and it's, you got to take every small advantage that you can get, because it's kind of still never going to feel like quite enough. And those are some of it. We've been fortunate to have gone through that process before. It gives us more confidence and more experience. Just having the experience of having done it, it definitely makes it easier and less kind of frightening.
Yeah, I mean, I learned, probably by my third game, I think, to under promise and over deliver. When you're collaborating with others and platform holders, etc. I mean, you've done, just to touch on the design, you've done extremely well in creating unique narrative and design styles. Where does that come from, that inspiration? Where is the, unique, 3 times in a row, unique wellspring of creativity?
Thank you. Yeah, you'd think we would know how to answer that, wouldn't you? But it's always,
not all you, Greg.
It's no, absolutely no. That's the. But I think we all, we struggle to answer this, because it's really hard to articulate, because it's just a bunch of it's just like, for each individual who works on one of our games, they have like a wellspring of personal influences that they bring to bear, and it's not nearly as cohesive of a set of things as you might expect, really. And the way our influences can be so personal that we don't even talk about them as a team. They just really are our personal influences. They are a range of media as well as life experience and everything. And I think for us, it really is about having sometimes rather deeply personal influences that we want to just put into our work as individual content creators on, collaborating together on these teams. And we'll figure out how to make sense of it later. But for now, let's just get it in there, because when everybody is doing the work that they feel like really fired up about, that really speaks to them personally, the chances are higher that you'll have something special there, and then we'll have time later to sort it all out, to kind of stir the pot enough to where it can feel like we knew what we were doing the entire time, when the reality is that through most of development we certainly don't. I don't know, that's a general way of talking about it, but it's I can never answer like the question of influences in like a specific way.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're kind of saying that you have all the different strands, maybe different colored wool, and then you knit everything together, once you've got the sort of ingredients.
Yeah, or the other thing, Amir, you should speak to. It reminds me of something Amir would often say, but we make games based around back to constraints, like the actual constraints of the games we make are the people here. So we don't endeavor to make the types of games or experiences that are not, that the people here are not excited to pursue. So it's really about trying to channel what it is that drives the people here. And take someone like Darren Korb, our composer and audio director, and the music in each of our games has been really, I think, a really key part of the experience. It's for Darren to sort of find a musical style that he's really passionate about and that really kind of aligns with the idea of a game we're making. It always feels like a breakthrough moment for each of our games. And we would sooner sort of adjust, we're always looking for what's going to be a great, how can the music fit into this experience? What's an approach that feels fresh, that we're really excited about, and we'll figure out how to fit it together there, as opposed to Darren having really specific marching orders of we need this style of music this time, and then he just has to do that. It's more about it's like a self-discovery process for all of us, working on one of these things, and comes from talking through some of these broader ideas at the beginning and trying to find those ideas where the most built-in alignment exists, where the most of us are the most excited as much as possible. And we have some, like folks here have so many, it can be hard to find those things because everybody here is driven by different things and has so many different kind of personal influences that they bring to bear. But it helps us that when we do find those things where there's enough kind of groundswell of excitement, we know it gives us the confidence that we're onto something that's hopefully going to turn out to be something special.
It just seems so natural what you're saying, and then that you guys have been together for 8 years. So you must know each other so personally, and an incredibly long time for one development team to stay together, and each of you growing, each of you learning, and it sounds like each of you are able to express yourself as well. I mean, it's almost like, it sounds to me, having, and believe me, I started with 4 of us in a bedroom, and by day the mattresses would be against the wall, and by night they'd floor, and we'd have to move the equipment, and to 70 and then to 140 staff, and the sense of family went right out of it. It was a job just to get everybody to show up in the building on the same day. So how have you done that? It's absolutely fascinating. It sounds like a really great environment in which to work and grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of that is we value the team and the team chemistry so much that a lot of our company values and a lot of what we do here and how we organize ourselves is to ensure that chemistry can thrive and continue. So we were 12 people for a very long time. Now we're up to 16, I think, or 15. So that's some hiring that we've done recently. But for us, we just really value the creative chemistry of the people here and their ability to do their best work. And so in any given year, what that might mean, we're willing to adapt to make that work. And so that's another thing where it's probably hard for us to say, like, these are the 5 ways in which you foster creative chemistry and make sure all your people are happy and stay forever. But I mean, being able to retain the group of people here, I think, means hopefully that we will continue to have access to the ability to create powerful experiences because of our just like shared collaboration. Like Greg says, we don't have like shared influences, but we have like an increasing number of sort of shared references from the games we've worked on and like the problems we've had to deal with. And so that part is enormously powerful. And yeah, it's I don't think we could all speak enough to how that's just the central trunk of everything we do here.
I think something else that's been really important here, and it was there right from the start with Amir and Gavin just working from a house, is that and I think it's made possible by us being a studio of like a relatively smaller size, is just the recognition and appreciation that different people work in different ways. They have like really, not only are their entire lifestyles different, but their work habits are different. They keep different hours, and maybe at a larger studio, it's not possible to let everyone just do things however they want, and more structure is necessary for a larger studio to just function at all. But in a smaller environment like ours, where we don't really have like departments per se, we just have a group of people, building up that trust and flexibility to where you just kind of, everybody understands one another's kind of work habits. It just ultimately in the long run, it enables the best work possible, because it just means that it's a group of creative people, and to the extent that they can work in the ways that are most conducive to their own creativity, that's going to be for the best. And it could have its day-to-day challenges of just like, hey, when's a time when we could all have a conversation when everyone's available or something like that. That's maybe a little bit easier in like a very structured office environment where the hours may be less flexible. But the benefits of the individual flexibility here, I think, have been really important, and have, I'm sure, led to the sustainability of this place. Because yeah, where, you know, a lot of the folks here who've been here the entire time, they're at different stages of life now than when, you know, the number of folks who are, you know, got married or had children is really, people are older, their lives go through different stages, and we've always tried to make sure to have that flexibility at the forefront, because we're going to stay together longer, we're going to make better games if this place can sort of withstand whatever people's personal needs are.
It sounds like you've grown up together in some ways.
For sure.
Yeah,
I mean, it's very literally true.
Yeah.
And do you meet often? Do you brainstorm together as a team, considering there's so few of you?
Yeah, for us, actually, that's a really good question, because we are this team, this broad group of collaborators, and there are times when it's all of us in a room talking about the game experience. But much more often than that, it's actually really small groups, because we think that collaboration works best kind of with the smallest number of people with the highest impact on the problem. We're actually like working on it. So a lot of conversations happen here in tiny groups, you know, two or three people or whatever it is, to try and solve problems on our games or problems on our distribution or problems, a customer support problem or whatever it is, because that's just faster. And that's just a more efficient way, and gives just the right people influence and input over something that they have actual expertise and knowledge on, without having to run it by like every single other person on the team. So that level of collaboration has worked for us from the start, and even with our increased size, that kind of collaboration continues.
And the only thing I wanted to add is creatively it produces something that's purer. You know, the idea of fewer cooks in the kitchen. We still, you know, every aspect of our games is subject to a lot of scrutiny by the rest of the team, and you know, by a wider group of playtesters and everything. But when it comes to like developing the like specific ideas for the design or the narrative or the art or the music or any aspect, we do value having kind of the smallest number of people involved in that process in many cases, just so it can be as true to the specific kind of content creators' own influences and passions as much as possible, and the rest of us sort of having faith in what the outcome of that process will be, and trying to find the right balance of everybody sort of collaborating to make sure that they have a shared understanding of where the game is going, but also being able to kind of go off on their own and chase after, you know, their hopes and dreams when it comes to the game that we're working on, and knowing that when the work comes from like a really personal point of view like that, it's just you're gonna feel it on the other side as a player, and it may not be like it's not about the pursuit of perfection so much as the pursuit of something that is like kind of personal and pure, like that. And we think that we've experienced that in other games we've played, and we tend to like, you could just feel that sometimes in games that they're made from such a distinct point of view, and that can be even more exciting than a game that's kind of more objectively, you know, perfect across technical categories or something like that. I think we try to foster an environment where that type of work can happen.
Yeah, so you get a little bit more of an individual touch in the game. I mean, inevitably, I mean, with so few of you, there's going to be a bit of crunch. In my experience, there's often creative contention, you know, where people want ownership of certain ideas. When you have contention in the team, you know, and not just being together for so long, how do you transcend?
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I think the number one thing we go back to is that ultimately the person who's doing the work has the final say in the matter. I mean, we definitely you know, try to get everyone on board, and you know, it pretty much never happens that someone just like goes rogue and you know, does something that no one else wanted. But like, we're small, everybody here does a lot of work on the game itself, and there's so many, like, the devil's always in the details for so many things. And so if you're the one who actually has to work through it, then you're going to be the one who's, you know, taking the feedback from everyone on the team and putting it together.
It's also, we have like a really problem-solving oriented culture. So if we end up in in that deadlock where 3 people actually have to act to move something forward, we always just try and look at it like it's the 3 of them versus the problem, and not like 3 people where only one of them will survive coming out of the room or something like that. So, you know, I think the expectation of creative harmony is a ludicrous idea, because that's fun of a lot of this stuff, and it is that it's like, you know, that if the decision was, it's contentious, and if the path was clear, you wouldn't even need to get in a room, you know, and have the argument in the first place. So the like creative conflict we've had here is like been like immensely important to helping us create better decisions and better games.
The games are absolutely born of that process. I think the one the only the one other kind of big component of this that comes to mind is it's actually something that Amir articulated specifically in recent years. I think it took us a number of years to even sort of discover this, as obvious as it seems, but you know, tempers can flare, and sometimes the conflict can, you know, we get into situations where people feel passionately about one side or the other, and not every creative conflict is as harmonious as every other instance. So we learn to recognize that if for some reason it gets hurtful, or someone just, you have a conversation, you have an interaction, and you just kind of, you might leave the room having made a decision, but for some reason you go back and sit down and, you know, it feels bad, and the next day maybe it still feels bad. We really try to be very consciously want to make sure that everybody in all such instances speaks up about that, ideally directly to the person, and just basically catch yourself in the moment where you realize, oh man, that interaction went poorly. You know, catch your breath, but very soon after, as soon as possible, go back and talk about it some more. It's worth it. You're probably going to come out of that conversation with a deeper understanding of what happened there, and a better awareness of what the actual, you know, issue and discussion might have been, and as opposed to letting things stew. So I think that's not like a revelatory information. I think everybody intuitively knows that it's never a good idea to sort of if you feel bad about something, it's never good to just let it stew, and because it'll just drag you down over time. But it still, I think, takes a real conscious effort to recognize those moments and to act on them swiftly. And I think that's something we've gotten better about over time. It's still an active process.
Yeah, it's a deliberate practice. Yeah. There's a lot of temptation because you made a decision to not revisit something that didn't go quite right, but it's so valuable to do that.
And what's insidious about some of those moments is that you catch yourself thinking, it's not a big deal. I'm just, you know, I'm just making mountains out of molehills, and I should just suck it up, and it's not a problem. But it comes, again, I think this is born of us working together for a long time. You know, you have to just be honest with yourself, and if that bad feeling isn't going away, you have to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, it's not obvious, but I mean, in a larger corporate environment, it's much harder for people to be able to share and be open, and tell the truth. You know, so and when you're working together so tightly, when you do transcend that contention, you actually can bring you closer together as a team. Right?
Yep.
Being an indie studio is a big mission. You know, sometimes seems like never ending. What have you learned? What do you continue to learn? What could you share with independent developers now emerging? What pitfalls can they avoid?
I think kind of as we've been talking about over the years is just learning how to make it sustainable for ourselves, and that means different things for different people here, and probably means very different things for other indie studios out there. But you know, we want to find ways to be able to, you know, make games you know, consistently and for years to come.
Yeah, there's that. I think the other thing is I'm always impressed how quickly the specific knowledge of anything can become irrelevant. So like, the wisdom sort of remains, right? Like that's why we're so influenced by the classics that Greg was mentioning in the games that we played, because a lot of those fundamental ideas are still sound, and maybe that's true in publishing and marketing as well, or something like that. But for me, I'm always surprised by how different everything is the next year we go into it, because everything's changed around us. We've all changed, and so that part of it is like just a constant. It's not like, oh, I'm constantly adjusting. It's just constantly observing that things are changing a lot.
Yeah, I think for me, something that has back to kind of to use Amir's expression of like a deliberate practice. I think for me, learning to love the process and not just be sort of hell-bent on what's at the end of the process. You know, you have this idea for a game, you have this wonderful game that you want to make. It really is so incredibly important to try to configure it so that the process, the cliche is it's about the journey and not the destination. The destination, may determine whether you get to take another journey again, but the journey itself is going to be where you spend most of your time and most of your hours and everything, and finding ways to really love that process through thick and thin, because many aspects of that process can be really difficult and really painful. But creative pursuits are made worthwhile through partly, I think, through the challenge, through kind of what you put yourself into it. And I think it's important to have a healthy mindset about that. And I don't think that there's like a prescriptive way of doing that. I think I've seen many different people approach that in really different ways. And I think in my own learning, I've come to realize that all those different ways are kind of valid in their own right, as opposed to just sort of expecting that people should kind of view this process in a certain way. As long as there's an ability to find joy in that process, then hopefully that will be felt in the end result as well. It'll, if nothing else, it'll increase your chances of making a game that's worth the player's while, I think.
So where would you like to be in 5 years? I mean, it's here 5 to 15 years. Will you still be together in 15 years?
Yeah, and that's a goal.
That would be nice.
Yeah,
We're still making games. Yeah, we feel like we have a lot of, after the last couple, it doesn't feel like we're, the initial fear of like maybe we had only one idea has sort of subsided. So I no longer feel inherently that we're just going to run out of ideas one day.
We'll know it though.
Yeah. For the time being, though, no, we certainly have 5 more years worth of ideas lying around. Be nice.
Are you working on something at the moment that you'd like to talk about, or you can talk about?
We're figuring out what we're gonna, our goal is to stay together as a team and keep making games, but yeah, we also we stay quiet about the particulars of that until we have something more coherent to present. But we're keeping busy. We're in this because I think for the most part, we do love the process, and so even as soon as we finish one of our games, it doesn't take us very long, judging by these last couple of occasions, for us to kind of hunker down and start talking seriously about where we want to go from there, because we feel lucky that we've been able to keep going, that each game has put us in a position to work on another game after that. I don't think a day goes by that we don't count our blessings for that, and as long as we're in the position to keep doing that, I think we're gonna keep doing the best we can to keep it going. Hopefully for a long time yet.
I had a great conversation with Steve Faulkner, the Puzzle Quest guy.
Oh yeah.
And he has a process, in between titles of throwing together different prototypes to see, to test out some of their creative ideas. Do you have a similar process to that?
No, not. We do. It's less of like a game jam, though. I think what you're describing to me is more like we jamming on a bunch of ideas. We do that kind of conversationally. But I think for us, the process has been so different on every game to come up with the one that came after it. So it's always informed by what we just went through and what that process was like.
We do prototype everything we make, but not in the format of let's prototype 10 wildly different things and then like pick among them which is our favorite.
Yeah, we do end up like through initial discussion, we end up picking at least a starting point, like a starting point as in a starting set of ideas that everyone here can start doing something with in their own right.
Yeah.
So I mentioned Darren. Darren can go start creating music in this particular vein, or Jen, our art director, can start painting imagery or characters or something, and gameplay prototyping can begin and so on. And then we kind of start evaluating start talking through it and see where that goes.
Yeah, thanks. Personally, I like the conversational approach as well because your imagination's not limited.
Yeah.
So what's the best bit about running Supergiant games?
So I'm going to steal Jen's answer, who's our art director and one of the key decision makers here, which is like the trust. It's like the trust the team places in you that you will figure stuff out, and also the trust you have in them that they'll figure their piece of it out. That part of it is such a wonderful. It's such a wonderful component of the process. It holds you to a really high standard, which can feel like a form of pressure, but the part where you have their support in making the ideas work is really key. And knowing that it's not just on you if it doesn't work, because they can help you figure out why. That to me has been a thing for sure. That's been really, really big.
If you had 3 bits of advice or 3 rules or 3 no-nos, 3 guidelines to give up-and-coming developers, what would you say?
It's always tough, right?
Yeah.
Rule number 1, don't listen to anyone's list of rules. Because nobody knows what they're doing.
Especially 6 months from now, if you're watching this later.
But I mean, in more, I think we've alluded to some of this, that I think we do tend to be resistant to kind of trying to be prescriptive because everyone's circumstances around this are really different, and there's so many different successful approaches, and also there's like survivorship bias of like sometimes you don't know, sometimes the reasons you think you were successful may not be the actual ones. But for us, I think the things that have worked over time is like the kind of the embrace of constraints has been really important. And there's spoken to this of just building games around what we can do, rather than just sort of expecting other pieces to come together of like, oh, as soon as I hire this amazing 3D modeler, I'm going to make the best first-person shooter ever. We always ask ourselves, what can we do with what we have right now, as like a starting point.
I think another one, so I think a piece of advice I sometimes find myself giving people is, if you do decide to start this and maybe you're leaving a job or you're coming out of school or whatever you're doing, like be really clear with yourself why you're doing it, because I think a big part of starting your own company is to like exercise the demon inside of you that wonders if you could do it. Like, can I do this on my own terms and all that kind of stuff. So if you're doing it for a reason like that, for like your independence and seeing what you can do personally and physically and what you can produce, be really, really careful about all the trade-offs around your independence, whether that's certain kinds of partnerships or publishing or funding mechanisms or the strain you might put on your relationships or whatever those things are. I think it can be like, once you know what you want, the path for you, the kinds of decisions for you can be very, very clear. So having that sense at the very beginning, when you actually have time to think about it, can be really, really, I think, valuable. The times I see people get unhappy in this are when they make the kinds of decisions that mean that they didn't even really get to do what they set out to do at the very beginning, which was the whole point of going independent.
One that I always give is make sure that you can finish a game, because it's a lot easier to start a game than it is to finish it. And so it's very easy to start working on a game and go, hey, this is fun and easy, and I'm making progress, and to go from there without realizing that you may be nowhere close to actually getting to a shippable product.
It's always bigger, like 100% of the time it's bigger than it appears, right?
Yeah.
Like the objects in mirror are closer than they appear.
Yeah,
like
bigger and less finished than it appears.
Yeah, and that does seem like a universal bit of advice, that it's better to start. Our ideas, in our case, they've grown, they start from like a small center and kind of grow organically. But the nice part about us not starting from like a big sort of design document where there's 50 different systems and so on that we have planned, is that it can be as easy to remove things as it can be to add them, and we can be pretty tactical about reducing the scope of our game when we feel like it's starting to slip out of our grasp and get bigger than what we can do. Because finishing it is so, done is better than perfect, as they say. Yeah. We'd rather go on to be able to make another game after the one we're working on than spend forever.
Yeah, we just effectively
absolutely
advice.
That's pretty.
Even with experience, Transistor still took 3 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly that. It's hard to say how much of that was just Transistor, but it was 3 years from Bastion basically coming out that Transistor came out.
And Bastion's first
launch,
platform
launch. Yeah. And similar sort of gap, I guess, between Pyre and Transistor.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to go over and see Stainless Software when they just had the success with Carmageddon. You remember Carmageddon?
Yeah.
And when I got there, they had like a row of Porsches outside the office. Have you done anything crazy with the money?
No, well, I mean, we've made the next video game.
Yeah.
So we tend to
Invested it.
Yeah, we've invested in like our fans' faith in us and our ability to try and, or desire really, to do another game together. So I would say that's where a lot of that is going. So we super appreciate the support of everyone who's enabled us to keep making games together in that way.
And then my final question is a reflective one. If you had your time again, is there anything you'd do differently?
It's definitely hard to answer, because so much of our process is about, figuring out, like we always say that, oh, if we could just take the, looking at the final outcome of Bastion or Transistor or Pyre, went back, it wouldn't take 2 years to make that game. I think we could make it in like 6 months or something. Yeah. So you could say that, but that's not, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's always an exploratory process, and so I might want to say, wish we could have like stumbled into our conclusions more efficiently, faster. But I think that's very, very naive to necessarily believe that was possible without just like getting lucky.
Yeah, the nice kind of insurance policy we've built into our development process is that by the time our games are finally starting to shape up, if we've done all the stuff that we've been talking to you about, and kind of like make games that are centered around the preoccupations and passions of the people working here, then it's exceedingly unlikely that we wind up in a scenario where we like look back at that game and go, damn, that was lousy. I wish we made something else. And we can look back at each of our games, and they've each been different, and they've each found their audience and, really, really loyal fans. And I think that for me personally, at least, it's really encouraging, because when you're in the thick of the process at the time, it can be really scary, and moments of doubt and crises of faith, I think, come quite frequently, even despite the years of experience that we have together. But knowing, trusting that process, it makes it so that you can kind of look back on it with a clear conscience, and then when someone asks what would you have done differently, maybe you can think of small day-to-day decisions, but it's nothing even worth mentioning. Is we're like, yeah, I think we feel pretty fortunate having been able to work on stuff like this. I don't think we could have made games like this in a different environment or with a different team.
Oh, well, that's a great answer. I hope I get to ask you that question again in another year.
Awesome.
I've made a huge mistake.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Out to you on Twitter for questions. What's the best way to get in touch with you if you are willing?
Yeah, we're just Supergiant Games on Twitter, and supergiantgames.com, our website. There, you can email us there or contact us on Twitter. That goes straight to us. That's part of the fun. Yeah. So we love hearing from people and from fellow developers. Yeah, one of the we wouldn't be here if not for the sage counsel of other developers that preceded us, and that are our peers who helped us navigate the kind of tumultuous waters of this industry. So we're always happy to pass on whatever knowledge we've gained.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. I mean, it's really been a genuine pleasure for me
Thanks.
to hear your story today and to understand a bit about the nuts and bolts and the inner workings of Supergiant Games. Thank you so much. I'm sure our audience will get loads out of this. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.